Apologies from Councillor Eastwood and Councillor Kitchen.
Thank you. Item 2 on the agenda is minutes of the last meeting held on Monday, the 25th of September. Question to the meeting is, can I take these as a true and accurate record and sign them as such? I have a proposer and a seconder, please. Councillor Franklin, Councillor Taylor, thank you. I'll sign these and we will continue in a minute. Item 4, announcements. Well, maybe started off with the announcements before we kicked off with the meeting. So I have no other announcements and there are none from the Chief Executive. Next item on the agenda is a report on the Council's finance and performance. And I would very much like to welcome the Cabinet Member for Finance to this meeting. Mark has kindly agreed to come and answer any questions, but first we will kick off with Dom doing the finance and performance report. And if any questions, basically, unfortunately, a lot of the questions were later than the deadline, which was Thursday night. I'm sure Dom will do his best to answer as many of them as possible. Basically, Councillor Bainham has also agreed later on that if there are any questions, he's willing to try and answer them live, on the proviso, of course, that if he doesn't have that data, the answer will be forthcoming later in writing. Okay, so with that, Dom, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. And what I'll try and do is I do my sort of normal presentation. I'll try and weave in some of the questions that I've been asked by you all, and I'll reference who's asked that question, and hopefully the two will match up and we'll find a path through what is quite a complicated area. So I've got revenue, capital, and our performance indicators to get through. I'll start with the revenue first. So overall, as the report says, we're projecting or forecasting a small, fairly small, £250,000 overall deficit, or overspend rather, at month 6. So first question from Mike Wood. It says the report mentions a budget surplus at the service level, but an overall deficit when considering the pay settlement and extra spending. How does the council plan to fix this deficit and ensure the budget stays stable for the rest of the year? Very good question. So first of all, the sort of the service level surplus will effectively be wiped out by the pay settlement when it goes into our salaries. So at the moment, the agreement has just been agreed nationally and it is going through payroll. So what we've not asked service managers to do is forecast that as part of their operational surplus, but it's easier to do it all salaries at a certain fixed percentage. So when that goes through the salaries, they'll be then able to do that inside their operational forecast budgets. So that part will sort of net off. So we'll be break even there, but we've still got this extra spending. You're quite right. So the value of £250,000 left, which we'll still find ourselves between now and the end of the year having to deal with. Sort of the historical perspective on this is that budget holders are quite often pessimistic on income, and they're often hard on expenditure when forecasting. And usually what happens, and if history is anything to go by here, we sort of get a better position by the end of the year. And so using that sort of perspective, we would expect that £250,000 to go back towards break even pretty much of its own accord anyway. But what I have done is sort of remind budget holders of the importance of not being pessimistic on income and challenging them on expenditure anyway, to make sure that they are closely monitoring for that very purpose. And if by Q3 we still find ourselves in this situation, then we still have a little bit of time to dial down the expenditure in the last quarter towards coming towards break even. So we do have reserves to cover off the overspend if we need them. and that's what they're there for. And I think that is a better way of doing it than taking a knee-jerk reaction right now and then finding actually we have a massive surplus at the end of the year. The risk, of course, in that is that if we don't take action now and it's gone the other way for whatever reason, then we've got a worse situation and we didn't take action early enough. But I think we're in a good position at the moment, and it should break even, and that'll be tested next quarter and at the year end, of course. There are, of course, large budget variances within individual services in the year, as you'll have seen from the report. So some are in surplus and some are overspending. I might raise another question here. 2 out of 2. There's a big increase in spending compared to last year. So why has the spending gone up? And what's the plan to handle the expected high spending by the end of this year and also in future years? And I think I've touched on some of these things in previous meetings. And it's largely to do with the high inflation. So everything's going up in price. It's the salaries costs that are going up, which is good news for the individual, but bad news for the organisation. There's the demand in B&B and temporary housing, in revenues and benefits, the reduction in planning income due to water neutrality. So there are a number of reasons why we're finding our expenditure effectively going up. And that will be the case for the rest of this year. It'll be the case for next year, because all that inflation is baked into our baseline next year as well. And perhaps I'll pick up the sort of the future years bit of the question when we come to the MTFS, because it's probably more relevant then, but I will return to it. At the moment, Treasury Management investment income is offsetting that, and we are living off that interest income, and it's paying for those increases at the moment. And again, I think I've mentioned before, that's a significant risk. If we spend those monies or the interest rate goes down, then that gap just gets bigger. And I can't emphasize that enough. And again, I'll return to that in the MTFS side of things. So we're okay for this year, just about, we think, at the moment. I did have a question from Tony Franklin. 90-day debt continues to increase. Is this normal, or is it likely to come down? And as you see from the sort of the snapshot of the top 8 or 9 debtors there, they're generally the higher value ones, because they're the planning ones, the Section 106 and the SILs. The council, between the legal departments and the planning department, is putting an awful lot of effort and resource into resolving these, but no results yet. It's not as if we are ignoring it, but it's just we can't get traction on all these different things, whichever way we go to try and improve that. It is a bit of a waiting game, so the number is going up at the moment, but I'm hopeful still that with all the pressure that we're putting on in various different formats, that we will get either some of those monies in, or as one of them actually says, we might get the housing instead, and therefore it's not a debtor anymore. So there's lots of work going in there. I'd just like to see the results just as much as you know, being a bit quicker. So that's my bit on revenue. Are there any other questions that you've got now before we move on from revenue? I'll move on quickly then before we change your minds. So capital, month 7. So this is the latest, very latest, hot off the press position, because the revenue is at month 6, takes a little bit longer to turn the handle on that. So month 7, capital spend of £9.5 million, which is considerably more than the whole of last year, which was £5.2 million. So I think we're doing better on capital. We're forecasting £14.8 million as the forecast outturn, which would be around about 87%. And the reason that you've got month 7 in front of you is that I tasked the finance team to robustly challenge that figure. And actually the outcome we think is we might really get quite close to that, unusually. So I'm surprised, and I'm sure you are too, because last year I think we got 43% outturn. It's significantly helped though by the local authority housing fund spend, which is the budget of £7.65 million. And as the summary paper shows you there, there are only 2 left of the original 16 to complete on. Those are under offer. We've got till the end of the month to try and sort those out. So we're working very hard to make sure we complete those on time. 4 of them have been occupied already. And there's a schedule of works and getting the tenants in and all that sort of queuing up behind it. But we've got the properties and we've paid for them, which is the good bit. On the round 2 side of things, the deadline isn't until March. We've got a little bit longer for that, but we've got 2 completed already, which is great, and 2 more under offer. And that effectively gives you a big percentage increase on the total, because we know we're going to spend that £7.65 million. If you remove that out of the capital programme, then you've got a capital programme left of everything but the LAHF of £9.3 million, of which the forecast for that bit is just over £7.1 million, 77%, which is still a massive improvement, as I say, on the 43% last year. And I think it's a sign that all the things that we try to put in place to improve people's sort of timing of everything, to spread the budgets over a number of years where necessary, to ratchet a bit more pressure on some of those budget holders, is starting to work. It's not perfect yet, but it's, I would say, if we end up anywhere over 70%, that's a big improvement already. It comes obviously with it's great to have the expenditure on those things, but is that expenditure too much? And therein lies the question as we look ahead in our MTFS as to whether we can afford to have capital programs of 9, 10, 16 million pounds. But we'll come to that again a little bit later. Linked to the capital programme, I think you might have seen this under corporate projects. There was another question from Tony about Parkside, and that the improvement costs have come in higher than expected. Do we have a number for how much higher at this point? And I'll try and answer this and then let Liz correct me if necessary. So yes, we do have a figure on it. We had originally a budget of £150,000, as you see in the capital programme. The costs are coming in at significantly more than that. It's over £100,000 more. Possibly that the budget was too light there, but we know that inflation, etc., especially in building works, is much, much higher. Which puts you into the sort of the category of actually, is there a challenge here? If we know maybe that we'll be leaving this building, are we going to invest quite a significant sum in it for only 3, 4, 5 years worth of use? Or we may decide, we want to spend a little bit longer here. We are a tenant, of course, of county, and therefore there are a number of different decisions here to be made. But obviously, the more you invest in a place, probably the longer you want to stay in there. So we will be looking at that certainly over the next few days and weeks to see whether actually we do want to do it or we don't at all. And which is why we're sort of, there's a bit of a holding pattern over that one at the moment. Okay. Any other questions on capital at all? Okay. Again, I'll move swiftly on. Performance then. And I'll start with a question this time from Len. So Len asked or raised the point, with 67% of our KPIs are better or at target, how does this overall performance compare with that of other councils? It's a good question. The difficulty, though, is that all councils are different and all councils will have different performance indicators and different targets. So they might have easier targets, they might have harder targets than us. So it's difficult to directly compare because they are largely local targets rather than national targets. So we know that Oflog, which is the Office for Local Government, is starting to introduce some national targets that we would compare against directly or be able to. And then that might give us a better benchmark as to where we are against other councils, but it's difficult just on our own KPIs to answer that question. I would say that if a council is delivering 100% of its targets, then either that target is too easy, perhaps. Could be, couldn't it? So question then back to Mike, who asked, there's been an improvement in the performance indicators, but it doesn't explain how that's been done. So what are the specific things done to make these indicators better, especially for those that were not meeting targets before? And it will depend on the indicator that we're looking at, but it's quite often a combination of focus, putting resource into to do something about it, and sometimes it's circumstance, just happens to be, which may be a reversal of why it became red in the first place. I'll give you a couple of examples here. So 3 went from red to green this time round. So percentage of incoming calls abandoned. So it was red, and we had some issues. It was peak period for it. There were a few illnesses. We didn't quite organise things in the right way. There were certain circumstances that happened at the depot that impacted on the customer sort of telephone calls. So we've reviewed what we can there, but actually the peak period is now over and it's dropped out of red anyway, and it would have probably gone down to amber or perhaps green, regardless of the actions that we've taken. But we've tried to learn the lesson from it so that we don't get a repeat this time next, or last quarter next time round. We've revisited the targets in the number of households in B&B accommodation because it was unrealistic. So, you know, you're sort of resetting everything. It's now amber, I think, or you know, we're just about on target because the target's changed. And we had 2, which were the health and wellbeing interventions for working age and over working age residents. It was red last time because we didn't have a shop in place. Now the shop's back open again and people are coming through the door. And it just happens that that's, you know, circumstance in effect. And there are other occasions where we lift resource from one area. I'll give you an example in revs and benefits here. So council tax arrears collection, revs and bens, you know, focused on that for quite a period of time, and it turned from red to amber, which is great. But at the same time, as they move that resource over there, up popped business rates, which went from amber to red because the resource was now working on something else. So it's always a bit of a balancing act of where you put that resource and the inputs and outputs that you get. So in total, there are 5 at red. Last time there were slightly more than that, 6 or maybe 7. So overall, we're moving in the right direction. But as I say, some come up and some come down.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask a couple other things. One was the correlation. I'm sure there's just a coincidence between the number of refuse bins missed and the number of flight tipping incidents, a pretty much identical number. Just thought that was quite amusing. But the income from HTC owned and managed commercial industrial estate space is green. Our target seems lower than what we've done for the past 3 years. I wondered if that's whether we should be reviewed. I mean, it is green, but I wonder whether we could look at it.
So on that one, we tried to adjust it, didn't we? With this is the timing of the raising of the bills.
Sorry, I didn't hear the question. So
Right. The income from HTC owned and managed commercial industrial estate space. Past 3 years has been over 2.7, and our target is 1.9-ish. And it just seems that it's green because it's been much higher than it had been for 3 years. I can say.
It's to do with the rent periods and the collection. So and the the quarterly rent. So we fund the budget is in April, July, and the actual receipts are a month later. So sometimes there are 3 quarters in income in with 2 quarters budget, or vice versa. We have looked into it to adjust it.
We need to get a better indicator, is the short of it, so that everyone can understand that. And we either have to exclude non-quarter income out of the calculation, which would be the simplest way of doing it, but it then takes a manual calculation to take that out. So we're looking at the best way to present it. And when it comes round to the 1st of April, we'll have a new indicator that isn't so difficult to understand.
Any other question? Thank you, Chair. Just an observation. My pet one, of course, is the number of refuse, recycling, garden waste collections.
I'm pleased to read that that's going to be reviewed because there's quite a number of variables in delivering that service that need to be reflected in how, because trying to get it away from red at the moment would be the cost of doing that would be disproportionate to the service provided, I think, because of those variables. So I was pleased to read that that is going to be reviewed next year.
I wanted to ask a question that occurred to me yesterday, actually, when I was listening to, I think it must have been Jeremy Hunt, which some people might think was a waste of my morning. But anyway, I think I heard him say that in order to, on the planning front, in order to move development forward, there could well be penalties on local authorities who did not deal with business applications, like business planning applications, within the requisite normal time. Now, if there's going to be pressure on local authorities to speed up, and the business applications are presumably the most labour intensive, they're the bigger ones, we're going to have to think about what implications that might have if it comes to pass, what implications that would have for staffing and generally the costs on the planning front. I mean, the first time I heard this was on the television yesterday morning, so I can't imagine we've done any sort of detailed thinking about this, but I just sort of put down a marker. Because if they do move ahead with that, what I know of the delays there often is with particularly major planning applications, then that's going to be something with quite significant resources costs. Thank you, Chairman.
I don't know if I can add anything to that other than I know that the planning department and the director of place will be horizon scanning for those sorts of things, and we will sit down and work out if there is going to be an impact, what that impact could look like. So.
Councillor Barris.
Thank you, Chairman. A small point. I'm pleased to see that our number of direct debit payers is very close to the target still. And I assume that because we got nearly 80% of people paying by direct debit, that that reflects well in our in-year council tax collection. So presumably the difference between what we're budgeting for and what we're actually achieving are people that aren't paying by direct debit. I just wonder whether we've got any plans to try and encourage more people to use direct debit before the council tax demands go out this year.
Just one point. I mean, when the council tax demands do go out, there will be a sort of accompanying leaflet, and that gives us an opportunity in that space to encourage direct debits. But I mean, there may be other comms angles that we can take as well. But at the end of it, you can't force somebody to have a direct debit. They can pay, the way they wish, as long as they're not late. Yeah, that's.
I don't think we're permitted to offer a discount to go to direct. Just thought I'd throw the idea there. Any other questions or points?
No, I don't know if you want. There were a couple of questions on maintenance. I don't know whether we want to pick that up separately alongside the Swan Walk issue. rather than here.
Yeah, there were 1 or 2 specific issues to do with the questions on maintenance and maintenance cycles, which I preferred to take in the same context as the Swan Walk issues that we'll be talking about, because actually there is a link there. So it would be sensible to do that.
In which case, I've sort of reached the end of my sort of bit on that. Unless there are any other questions or anything we've covered so far.
Are there any other questions or points put on that part of the agenda? No?
Just make
Yes.
one observation.
Please, Mark.
I spent a couple of weeks ago a weekend in the company of fellow cabinet members for finance from councils all around the country, and the overwhelming message that I got is most of them would love to be in the position that we're in. Absolutely. So no, I know there are always issues with budgets and getting things on time in our position, but if we look at it relative across the country, we're doing pretty well.
Councillor Walters?
Thank you, Chair. It's just a small point really, that one of congratulations to the museum on having achieved higher than targeted attendances, because I think the museum's always been the poor relation, if you like, or the poor person within the council, and I think they've done well to attract that many people this year.
Thank you. Any other points on that part of the agenda? No? I'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is a review of the council's medium-term financial strategy update. Again, we'll get an update from the Director of Resources, and at that point then I'll open up the floor for any of the questions that Mark may be willing to answer, provided that Dom hasn't already answered them beforehand. Dom, over to you.
Thank you. So the report, the draft report, sorry, was circulated. So I do hope you've had a chance to read that. I wasn't going to do a presentation with a slideshow, etc., but I was just going to touch on a number of the things that I think are worth just bearing in mind as we talk through and discuss later. So obviously this is still largely built on assumptions. They're estimated budgets, of course, and the report tries to set out how that position has moved since February, the last time we had a formal MTFS presented. Obviously, when we're talking about assumptions, we're talking about estimates. Estimates aren't always accurate. That creates uncertainty. The numbers that you will see, especially the further right you go in terms of the later years, the less accurate those numbers are going to be. So bearing all that in mind, I'll just focus, I suppose, on next year, so 24-25, and some of the assumptions there. The work is still going on. Sam and her team are extremely busy sort of putting these lines into the budget system itself, and there's challenge ongoing as well. So these numbers will move slightly before we get around to seeing them properly for January and February. But our assumptions are that funding for the year in terms of government funding, other funding to us, is going to be largely the same as last year. But it's a one-year settlement, and obviously a one-year settlement rather than a multi-year creates uncertainty in itself. We don't know what the second or third year ahead is going to look like, but just dealing with next year, we think the funding is going to be the same. We'll only find out on the 19th of December, or the week of the 19th of December, we've been told. If we think about the question earlier from Mike, talking about inflation and talking about salaries, talking about materials, utilities, the expenditures are all going up, and they're going up by significant amounts. So just inflation, over £1 million, just salaries, over £1 million. They're also what you might call one-off items. So the audit fee to try and resolve the situation with the audit market in terms of our external auditor, PSAA, who have the sort of the remit of setting the fees, have increased that. It's going to go up by £100,000 to try and get people into the market to be able to deliver the service. And that's a cost we can't avoid. Similar for revs and benefits, the impact there is going to go up. So not only do we have inflation, but we have these extra additional costs. So we need to make sure that we can drive up our income. So all the fees and charges, the treasury management income, investment income is good. But fees and charges, so garden waste price going up by £5 and no second bin discount. The multi-storey car park passes going up because they haven't been put up, in recent years. So it's making sure that we can get enough income in to cover that expenditure as it goes up, or reducing that expenditure by reshaping what we do already and doing it on other areas that we want to prioritise. And a key factor of that is also having council tax go up, and overall by going up by 2.99%, which is at the moment we think still going to be the maximum amount that government will allow us to do so without breaching the cap. So our net expenditure just between this current financial year and next financial year will go up net of £0.5 million, although it could be higher. So at the moment we're above that, and we're working hard to try and push that back down to that £0.5 million growth. And there's a lot of challenge going on to try and do so. But we're optimistic that come January, come February, it should just about balance, which is good for the forthcoming year. Looking further ahead, though, the situation is a bit bleaker than that. So the continuous impact of inflation, compounding it year on year, although inflation is falling, it fell to sort of 4.6% or so for 1 month at least. We'll see what happens the following month. And the salaries pressure increases. It's constant pressure to find that all the time. And then you add in the food waste announcements. So by March 2026, we'll have to collect that according to government. And it's talking about some capital funding. So we might get the trucks and the caddies perhaps paid for. And then it talked about transitional income for revenue purposes. Transitional wasn't explained, but it could just be the year of transition that you turn to it is paid for in revenue terms, and then you're on your own. And of course, that could be a £1.5 million to £1.8 million annual cost that we have to bear. We do have a little bit of money put aside in an earmark reserve that might cover us for almost a year. So that impact doesn't start to come through in our MTFS until 27-28. But it's still then a significant jump, and that's why it jumps from around about £1.5 million to £3 million in total. We're expecting the loss of some funding as well from government when they reorganise after perhaps the election, the year after that. At the moment, the MTFS anticipates that our temporary funding guarantee, which is this funding guarantee grant, will be removed. Now, we're not taking that currently into our revenue, so we should be okay. But we still are, or still do rather have almost just over £2 million of income that comes in from government, and they could cut further and that could go. So our MTFS is based on the worst case scenario. It's trying to sort of picture a prudent line somewhere in the middle of what we think might happen. And then we have all the costs, of course, if we're going to pursue the net zero and the environment themes. And I know that Helen Peacock and Paul Anderson are working hard on updating the numbers and some of the estimates that I'm estimating into actual sort of more realistic maybe and a bit of work behind them rather than my figures out of thin air. And that could cost though £10 to £12 million just on the carbon or decarbonisation elements, which would be about roughly about 25% of the numbers that I'm sort of using, which also includes other infrastructure replacements. And the report touches on a scenario that if we spend a big chunk of our money on something, and in this just example, I used updating the capital. It needs a refurb at some point. If we do that, it worsens the financial position because you're spending £10 million that is currently sitting in our bank account earning 5%, and it doesn't give us much of a financial return after spending that. And then for net, could be £500,000 of income lost, and you gain an extra £150,000 of income at the capital. You've got a gap there that you still need to fill. It makes your deficit position worse. And of course, in amongst all this, we've still got water neutrality in the background, with a big question mark over the income there and how quickly that will be resolved. So will that income come back on stream or not, if you pardon the pun? So it's difficult at the moment to know precisely what's going to happen. We are in a much better position, as Mark did say, compared to other authorities, but it's the authority with the numbers in front of us that, you know, is of concern. It's not a panic situation yet, but we need to be careful with how we spend and what we do over the next short term, and then work out how we're going to fix it medium term. That's it. Right. That's it in terms of my presentation. We did have some questions. I don't know, Mark, do you want to sort of pick
Do you want to
those?
handle the questions, Mark? Or-
Yeah, I'll take the question. From Mike Croker, and his question says, he asks, regarding the impact of a large capital project on the MTFS, the potential Capitol Theatre refurb used as an example in sections 333 and 335 is presumably but one of several that will be required to meet AGC's 2030 carbon neutrality target. What is our strategy for identifying and managing these demands on capital? Okay, I think the short answer is the strategy needs to be developed. At the moment, we're working on imperfect data and therefore imperfect information. The Capitol Theatre is at the head of the queue by virtue of the fact that that's the first one that really needs refurbishment pretty well fairly soon. And therefore you wouldn't do carbon neutrality works and then refurbishment settlement. You do that at the same time. Dom's been looking at the question about understanding the cost of net zero and how much carbon we might save for each pound of expenditure, or indeed how much carbon would save at the capital. And this is ongoing work where Helen and Paul are actually on this at the moment. There are also other assets such as the leisure centres, which are council owned, but run by a third party, Places Leisure. Now that technically can wait till 2050 because that's not included in our 2030 target. But you could argue that's something of a technicality, and we won't certainly are not going to wait till 2050 before we address leisure centres. Although, so there is a little bit of sort of playing as you go along at the moment, and that's because if we were to wait for perfect data, we'd end up doing nothing because it would take us so long to get that perfect data. So I recognise the fact that it's imperfect at the moment, but we are working to improve that situation and come up with a better timeline and order of priorities. Okay. Sorry, Mike, it wasn't Len. I keep looking at Len when I'm actually talking to you. The next question we had from our chair, and I'll read that. While understanding the issues associated with the costs of living, the costs of supporting 3,200 working age claimants, this is council tax support, may become onerous. What is not clear is the total cost of this if one assumes no support from county and none from central government. Maintaining the current level at £195 on our own for 1 year is brave. Sounds like something out of Yesminster, a brave decision. Is the extra cost in this scenario £500,000? If so, what is the total cost of the scheme? And how does this evolve over the MTFS period? Well, the answer to the cost is the total cost of the scheme is projected to be around about £500,000, not an extra cost, total cost, assuming that nobody else funds it. And realistically, we're not expecting anybody else to come in over the hill with the cavalry. Our funding from this will be from the 24-25 funding guarantee grant. This is the one that Dom has already referred to, and we're expecting that to come through next month. And that temporary grant keeps our overall funding level as the same for another year to continue in 24-25. We have not previously and are not planning to take this grant into revenue per se, so we don't become reliant on it. So the impact of 24-25 is not felt in revenue as it's not funded. The 195 has remained the same as last year, although we expect council tax will increase, albeit moderately. So this means that effectively claimants will have a slight loss in terms of the real term support, but that would be fairly minimal. This is partly in recognition of the cost of funding it alone, but also acknowledgement that claimants can get used to it and then expect it in further years. However, future years of CTS council tax support payments are not factored into the revenue budget in the MTFS. In terms of the future, revenues and benefits are looking at the scheme. Options include changing the 10% that claimants pay, or a banded scheme, a discretionary pot rather than a blanket application, a stepped reduction in amounts down from 195, or complete withdrawal. This may depend on future settlements. Well, it'll depend to a large extent on future settlements. This work will come back to the Finance and Resources PDAG early next year. We would earmark more than the 2024-25 funding guarantee grant for future phasing out and set aside a sum to be used to fund a reducing CTS payment over the next 2 years, by which time we'd hope that the peak of the cost of living crisis may have passed. So looking ahead, there are plenty of options available to us. Nothing has been decided or committed to at this stage, and it will go through the PDAC the process, as I mentioned. But it may be shaped by things in the future that are outside our control. Okay. Yep.
Any other points?
Yeah, I have some other questions. But,
Please continue.
yes.
Fine.
okay. So the next question was also from yourself, Paul, and this is on the issue of waste collection, bearing in mind the desire of residents to maintain the good levels of service we have. Why are we going for the 1-2-3 scheme instead of the 1-2-2 scheme? That's 1-2-3 weeks intervals, as the delta cost is only £300,000, which would provide a better service. Okay, so we've been having trials on 3 weekly service. The data from this 3 weekly collection trial indicates that there's plenty of room in the standard 140 litre bin for the waste if emptied every 3 weeks. Therefore, there should be change in the level of service moving from fortnightly to 3 weeks. The environmental impact and cost of driving vehicles around the countryside collecting half-full bins is a considerable factor, as well as the cost differential. The trial also looked at separate and more regular collection of absorbent hygiene products, that's nappies and hygiene products, pads, etc., which might be needed for a short amount of time for some households, possibly more so in the warmer months. And these households would be able to sign up to it, but that would come at a cost.
Thank you. And at that point, I bring up my perennial, what about dog waste? And I'm thinking also about cat litter and stuff like that, which is another one that goes into the bins. And those are problems for people who live, and there's a lot of people who've got cats and dogs. So I'll bring that perennial up. Councillor Len Ellis-Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Do we have data on if we move to less frequent collections that the vehicles would come back to depot to empty more frequently?
So,
well, if you've got a fuller bin,
yeah,
you're going to fill the truck up quicker. So therefore, they may be coming back to the depot more frequently. And then there's other risks associated with that. Sometimes you might miss a bin or whatever. So have we data?
I don't have that data in front of me now.
No, I didn't expect it to. Sorry.
Yeah. And can I respond separately outside after the committee? Okay, I have a third question here from the chair. 2020.
Sorry, I didn't mean to hog it. I just felt obliged to supply questions at the stunning lack of questions that there were by Thursday night.
Yeah, that's okay. Anyway, so go ahead with your question. 2022-23 saw major events in the area that had a major disruption on local businesses, namely the closure of the A29 at Pulborough and the closure of the A272 in Midhurst, and major impacts there on shops and business. Natural events or major disasters are not catered for in our budgets. In the case of the A29 closure, HGC had to use a sizable amount of the ED budgets and funding to support the Pulborough businesses. Will the cabinet member accept the proposal to make a budget of about 150,000 to be spent to support local business in the event of such events? In that way, the ED budget can be preserved and a contingency emergency business support budget be used. Okay, well, my answer to this is that further budget can be added at any point during a year should an incident arise. And I'm not sure it's prudent to have in place such a budget in revenue and then regularly not spend it if we don't have that situation arising, because thankfully these incidents are not commonplace. Reshaping existing resources to changing priorities is also, again, I would consider a more prudent option. If extra is required, this is the sort of thing that reserves are for, and we currently have enough general reserves to do so. Conversely, if the money is put in a budget and then we don't have an event and therefore it is not spent, there's quite a temptation for others to say, oh, there's a budget, let's grab it. And it may go to things that we're not fully planned for, or we're charging the taxpayer for not using it. So the answer is, if we need to pull on a reserve to support businesses, or indeed any other local disaster or unforeseen event, we have the flexibility and capacity to do that, and that would be my preferred option.
I can come back on that. I don't agree with that. The issue is, if you look at the structure of the council and the way it's run, if you don't have it in the budget, it's not budgeted for. You then have to come to council, full council. Correct me if I'm wrong, Tom. You have to come to full council to get the funds freed up. The issue there is a question of time. The problem is, if it takes you a month or 2 months to get the funds freed up to address an emergency situation, you've then wasted 2, 3, 4, 6 weeks before the funds could be freed up. And that's a major problem. Chichester freed it up overnight by a process that our chief executive wasn't entirely enamored with, and she was quite uncomfortable with. By doing what you propose, it then prevents you from acting quickly, and time is of the essence in these sort of things, as has been proven in Pulborough and in Midhurst. So I hear what you say, but you need to consider the element of time and the processes of the council to free up the funds.
There's always the option of an emergency council meeting, which can be arranged at short notice, as we are doing this week. So I'm not sure that the process is as long-winded as you may be doing that to be.
History proved otherwise, but fine.
I was only going to say that it depends on the value, doesn't it?
Yes,
now? So that obviously under £100,000, I could authorise that in my role as director, with the check and balance of the cabinet member, the leader, and yourself as chairman. So depending on how much we could, get a lower sum into action sooner rather than later by that method too.
Well, thanks for the clarification. In the case of Midhurst, it was 300,000 and change, I think, which is well above. But in the case of Pulborough, I don't know what it was off the top of my head. But I didn't want to emasculate the economic development budget to address an issue. That was it. Thank you. Councillor Wood.
If there's a hard limit on 100,000, would there be some mechanism that we can increase it under a certain situation that we might need it in the future?
I suppose I'd be more comfortable I know I like the power and the authority to do things, but actually I'm more comfortable that that goes through the whole council for things where everyone takes a view rather than just a particular place. So this could be an isolated example with one particular town. There are 48 councillors with different perspectives on things. So actually sometimes it's better to have that wider viewpoint on everything from everyone.
Councillor Emery?
My understanding is the intention is to review the constitution. Would there be an opportunity when that constitutional review takes place to consider allowing a clause in the event of such an emergency for empowerment to be given to the cabinet?
It's within the realms of us to write our own constitution within legal rules. And that could be something that could be, because that's going to be a working party on the constitution to be established. And I would suggest that is an input that you could put in, Nigel.
Thank you.
But I wouldn't want to prejudge the outcome of that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mark. Any other questions for the cabinet member? Councillor Circus?
Thank you, Chairman. I don't know whether it's improper for a former cabinet member to answer Len's question about overfilled waste vehicles, but if it's not, I mean, we looked at, when I was the cabinet member for waste issues, we looked at this to a considerable degree, and frankly, there is no reason in a 1, 2, 3 system why the residual waste vehicles should be overloaded, because you've got to remember that something like 40% of the waste in a residual waste bin is food waste. It's a horrendous amount. But of course, the whole point about food waste collection is that will then be removed from the residual waste collection. You also need to look at all the other things that would be removed and are being removed. So you've got batteries removed, textiles removed, hard plastics can now be recycled at the civic amenity sites. And of course, one of the concerns has been what is known in the trade as smellies. Well, there would be a weekly, or at least I believe the modelling that's taken place has been based on the idea of a weekly collection of smellies. In which, and when you look at all the, there will actually be, under a 1, 2, 3 system, I think I'm right in saying, more bin collections than there is at the moment. So far from reducing the bin collections, there will actually be technically an increase. But if everyone uses the vastly expanded facilities to take waste out of residual waste, there will be no problem, absolutely no problem. I mean, people will take time to get used to it, but all the experience of other local authorities that have got the 1, 2, 3 system, and I think there's one in Wales that does residual waste collections on a 4-weekly cycle, but I wouldn't suggest that. But it has been trialled already by, I think it's Chichester, and they did not encounter any problems. So I don't know whether it saved Mark the need to pursue that, but I hope that's an answer to Len. I think what I would say is that on food waste, the Director of Resources talked about imperfect data. I think on food waste, I wouldn't even call it imperfect data. I think it's complete guesswork. Complete guesswork. We don't know what system we're going to adopt. We don't know what government funding we're going to get. We don't know whether the government timetable is going to remain. And also, of course, there are other issues in the government's proposals apart from food waste, such as standardization of materials across the country. Now, what implication will that have? So, it's complete guesswork as to how much this will cost, but that doesn't alter the fact that 2026 is not very long in local government terms. And as you've heard from the cabinet member, modelling and trialling is already taking place, so that we're as ready as we can be for when we have to move forward. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Any other questions for the cabinet member? No. Thank you, Mark, for coming. Very useful, and thank you for your complete answers in many cases.
Thank you, Chair. I think it was your invitation was an offer I felt I couldn't refuse.
With that, I would like to bring forward item 10, the urgent business. Can I have a proposal and seconder to bring that item of business forward so that we can deal with the officer and the officer can then go home? Thank you, Councillor Bevis, Councillor Wood. Thank you. At this point, I'll bring forward the urgent business, which is in fact the Swan Walk car park. We have Officer Liz Williams with us, who is an expert in the topic. So would you like to give us a quick overview of where we are? And then I will open the floor to the councillors to ask you questions, which I'm sure you'll have no problem answering. Thank you.
Thank you. We're at the position now where we have a partial top floor of the Swan Walk car park, which has had its membrane removed, and now we need to look at repairing and putting a new membrane down there. And the reason that it's becoming reasonably urgent is because temperatures are getting lower, which has an effect on repairing it, the glues and things like that, the resins, and also obviously it's exposed to rain, and would like to get it operational as well so that we can use it, get revenue from it. And we've been out to tender for the remainder of the works, which has come in quite a bit higher than we anticipated, but also those tender prices are for a 30-day period. So if we don't take those now, then we'll be going out to tender again much later. But the main thing is actually around the extra cost, which we're looking for a further capital budget of 298,845.
Thank you, Liz. At this point, I'll open the floor to members. Any particular questions? I think, Sam, you had a particular question, didn't you?
It's really linked to sort of maintenance. So obviously, I mean, it's well beyond its useful life, but it's more trying to think, are there other facilities out there that are, that could be ringing alarm bells as well? So it's really what else is potentially coming up in addition to the car park that maybe we don't know about. I don't know.
Yeah, I suppose in terms of maintenance, the car parks particularly have had a life care plan. So we have looked at them over a period of time, because there's a structure, particularly the concrete structure, that we've had a look at, even only just 3 years ago, took our hammer tests, etc. But on an annual basis, we carry out planned preventative maintenance on properties, our M&E particularly, and we've had a 5-year plan on fabric maintenance, which we're looking to renew and make inspections of this year. In terms of a long-term life care plan, the car parks really are our only buildings that we have had that in place, our operational buildings. We'll be looking at the capital fairly shortly. I mean, we've done a fair amount of work on that already, but with the project that's possibly coming up, we'll look at that in more detail.
Thank you. Do you want to, Sam, you?
My second query, and it was to do with, has it been deemed unsafe? Because of course, at this time of year, around Christmas time, that's probably where we have a rise in demand for the car park, and it's where a lot of revenue will be lost and sacrificed. So it's really linking, have we got an engineer's report that says it's unsafe? That means we cannot possibly delay beyond, because of course it's wet now, it's not necessarily cold. And it might actually be better to do it when it's cold rather than wet, all those sorts of things.
Yeah, I mean, it's not an ideal time to do it just before Christmas, and we have got some other options in terms of trying to placate those areas that are lost, for revenue. So we're only up to level 1, which is Creative Assembly have allowed us to use that space that's normally leased out to them. It's got another park that we're using more for staff. But in terms of the works, it's not quite unsafe. It's more that it has a potential to deteriorate more. So at the moment, the pricing with the winning bidder at the moment originally priced for what they thought was 200 square meters of repair work. Looking at it now, it's all exposed. It's 600 meters of repair work, and it's got potential to kind of be a greater area. Yeah. Also with water ingress, it's not. It goes in and can affect what's underneath as well. So not so much the decks, but more the electrics that we've just upgraded.
Councillor Croker.
Thank you, Chair. If I could just go back to your answer on the first question. As I understood it, we don't have a maintenance inspection regime for other than the car parks?
That's a long-term maintenance plan. We do annual maintenance checks on all the buildings, all the operational buildings, but more of a 40-year plan. Don't know.
Okay, so things like the leisure centres will be have an annual structural inspection?
They're a little bit different because we have we lease them out to the operator, and that's a full repairing lease. So the responsibility for that is on the onus is on the operator.
So there's only really it's a legal requirement for the operator to carry out thorough inspections. Presumably, there is a risk there that the operator goes fut, and we're left with holding a damaged structure potentially.
There is risk, yes. This in the situation when we're at with our leisure operator, their agreement comes up in 2027, so we're making arrangements in the next year to have a condition report, and then we call them to task on anything that we believe is not going to the level that it should be maintained.
Okay, thank you.
I've met with the contractor and their manufacturer, and they believe they would be getting finished 2 weeks prior to Christmas, but they have put in a period of 10 weeks to be conservative.
So if they started tomorrow, it would be done 2 weeks before Christmas.
Yeah, the end of this week, I think, after the meetings.
Okay.
Yeah.
What would the expected loss of revenue? I don't know if you can answer this one. What would the expected loss of revenue be, and whether it would be worth pushing quickly to get it ahead of Christmas, and whether that be offset by it obviously being busy? There was a question somewhere in there,
and I think I know what that is. And I think I can get an answer to that. So we're looking at ways of freeing up capacity in there. So at the moment, some of our staff park in there, for example. They won't be parking in there because we'll get a customer in there instead. So there are bits and pieces that we can do around the edges to reduce the number of lost spaces. I would say that overall, it's not actually all that often that it's absolutely jam-packed in there. So for a lot of the time, there'll be vacancies and spaces even in a full operational car park. We've got estimates though of of it could cost us up to around about £180,000 in lost revenue. That's sort of, I think that's is that worst case scenario. We will do everything that we can to try and mitigate that. We're opening up other sort of avenues and other areas where we could park cars instead, to take out more capacity to free up. So that number should come down. My view of it really is it's a trade-off, isn't it, between do we spend an extra £180,000 on the contractor to say, you know, get that in there as, you know, and reduce it down by 2 weeks, throw everything at it, versus if they take their time, you spend the 180,000 in lost income. That might be less than that. So there's a sort of a balance between how we approach this. But what we can't afford to do, I don't think, is to wait until April when the temperature rises. The price could have gone up. And we have to do it as quickly as we can, but as cost effectively as we can. There's no simple answer to it.
Thank you.
I think it's also fair to say from an engineering point of view is you wouldn't be doing it now, but the problem is we were going to do it earlier, but then they hit the problems, which has then delayed things. You don't want to mess around with membranes and you don't want to mess around with rebar and concrete and all the rest of it in the middle of the winter. Ideally, you would have done it in September, which I think was the original plan, wasn't it?
It's actually a little bit earlier. Yeah, it was in the middle of summer.
So it's an accident that we are where we are, and you know, we need to address it as quickly and as best we can. Councillor Emery.
Thank you. It was really in respect of the volume of loss of spaces. My understanding is that there will be 200 spaces lost from the top floor, and that the current provision is only to allow 40 spaces in the area behind the Methodist Church. That seems a very substantial deficit. And given the fact it is Christmas period and that's when our car parks are there at absolute maximum, my concern is to our traders and to and our residents in terms of loss of a really important amenity. And I'd like to understand more in terms of what we can do, park and ride to Colliers, etc., as being considered to address the concerns of our residents.
Absolutely. The park and ride already at Hobhost operating. We have other car parks, of course, so Pirry's Place, the Forum, Den Road. You know, we've got a number of different things. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be a little bit of a squeeze, but we will cope, won't we? Sainsbury's are helping out, aren't they? They have free parking in their car park at the moment. I think they will find themselves inundated anyway. People trying to park there and shop in the shop or pop into town. So I don't think car parking is going to be an issue in terms of, you know, it might inconvenience people a little bit. They could get the bus, they could cycle in, they could walk in, couldn't they? Active travel being, you know, something that we should be encouraging, not necessarily driving cars around all the time. So, you know, every sort of challenge has its opportunity on something as well, isn't it?
Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Franklin.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one, and thanks firstly for what is probably an enormous amount of work having to be done very quickly. Appreciate that. Just think back to the tenders. We're under pressure on time here, so there's I suppose the question is there any risk that we're having to pay a premium because of the short lead time that we're demanding of on any contract?
There is a small amount of money that would be included there for the short lead time, and it's about getting the product to site quickly. Normally it's a 7-week period. As soon as they find out, they're kind of getting the products to site and starting straight away. So and mobilizing people. So there is a minor amount, but the larger amount is in relation to the area that needs to be rectified.
And then just look, or additional to a point really, which is on what basis are we selecting the provider or making the award? Is it price? Is it technical? Is it combination, or is it lead time?
No, it's price.
It is price. Okay.
So we went out to 4 contractors, and so they're all considered to be competent and able.
And all able to do it within the time period that we're demanding.
Well, in fact, actually, one dropped out because they said they couldn't do it.
Right.
Thanks very much.
Councillor Livingston.
Oh, thank you. I'm just trying to understand why we've got the additional cost. Now, we've been told that this membrane has been life expired for over 8 years. Now, if we'd have actioned this 8 years ago, would we be ignoring inflation and all those other aspects? Would we be paying a great deal less or not? And minimise other damage as well.
Yeah. I think the damage is in the substrate, and it's how it bonds to the concrete. So over time, that would have deteriorated more over that 8 years. But we've had 8 years more of the membrane and that area being able to be used. Yes, it would have been probably less, but we've had that period where we've had the revenue over that time as well.
I really find that very hard to believe, and to understand, the balance and the revenue coming in. But, we've got damage caused because we haven't replaced the membrane. That's how I understand it. And so we're having to do additional works. Are we having that same policy with the other car parks, the other buildings, the other assets we HDC have, to just let it go until it has to be done? And then we find out it's going to cost us more.
Can I just perhaps come in there as well? Something. So if we'd have replaced it fully 8 years ago, probably only have 2 more years life left anyway. So we'd have to have done it in 2 more years' time. So actually, what you're getting is it sort of lasting a lot longer. You're paying slightly more at the end of it to replace it, but we could have paid, 3 times by the time we get to it. So, isn't it, between whether you eke it out for as long as possible in the best way that we can, or you keep paying continuously for a new car every 3 years.
But then you have to accept the risk that you'll end up paying more and be damaging other parts of the assets, which is going to come at the wrong time of year. It's going to impact the council more, our residents more. But that's the risk you have to take.
No, of course, and it is a risk. It's managing that risk, though, isn't it? And the property team work extremely hard to try and avoid that. And what this is one case out of many that we might be doing in that sort of a way, on not just on car parks, but on a number of different assets, to try and get as much value as you can out of that asset. And if we had the earlier conversation about our MTFS, if we had loads of money and we were stacked with lots of cash, we could afford to regularly update things before they expire.
Yeah, but what we've got is competent engineers giving a life expectancy, and we should be taking that into account, where we are gambling on our assets.
I think you put that in very strong words there, but I take your point.
Yeah, thank you.
Messages of manage is an issue of risk management, and of course that's always a very fine line to tread, and it's always a very difficult thing to do. Councillor Taylor. Apologies, I didn't see it. We'll come back to you in a minute, Alex.
I've been told that by the manufacturer, but I wouldn't hand on heart say that was realistic.
I think that's the key factor we're being asked.
We haven't planned for that revenue.
Yeah, that's
in there.
what we're being, one of the key things being raised.
if we didn't do it, now we would, that revenue would be lost right up till April. Because it'd be too cold to actually do it.
Yes, but I think there's a sense from people here.
Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Livingston's already covered some of the points I was going to raise, and I have to say I do agree with him on that front. I do have concerns over the length of time the membrane has been expired for, and I have to agree. I think 8 years is a bit of a stretch. We are playing a little bit too far, in my opinion, when we're leaving things like this that long and stretching it that far. I don't necessarily buy the argument of it saving on revenue in terms of we can use those parking spaces for long, because we're going to have to close it anyway to replace it whenever we have to replace it. So I don't buy them, especially this close to Christmas as well, with that risk. I think I don't buy it personally. In regards to going forward with this, obviously there has been, in my view, a mistake with not replacing this earlier. We are where we are now. I think we're going to have to replace it now. As if we're going to wait and the weather conditions aren't going to be right to replace it, or if the cost is going to go up even further, I think we have to swallow that pill now, as hard as it may be. But going forward with these kind of things, is for example, the replacement membrane, if an engineer says that's got an 8-year or 10-year lifespan, going forward, are we going to stick to those timelines to ensure we're minimizing damage and disruption to car parks and other infrastructure? Because if it's been 8 years over the lifespan in the first place, was this known about earlier, or was this only just picked up recently? That's what I want to know.
In this particular occasion, I mean, it's the warranty period, it's the 10-year lifespan, and it has been reviewed by engineers as being completely intact. Probably about 18 months ago, we started to see some deterioration on the driving areas, and that was patched up. So it wouldn't be the intention. I mean, we'd seek professional advice again.
Can I just come back on that just really quickly? So you mentioned that engineers have obviously reviewed it 18 months ago. They saw some deterioration. Fine, that's fine. So after the 8-year warranty period had expired, is there a certain time period between inspections of membranes or of other similar infrastructure after warranty periods, or was it just a one-off inspection? That's i.e., do you have some, say, every year an inspection after a warranty period is expired, or was it we just decided to inspect it on this occasion?
We have an annual maintenance plan that we do carry out inspections, and then if there's things that of concern, we get more detailed information from experts.
Thank you.
Councillor Lennox-Brown.
Thank you, Chair. What I've not heard is the cost of not doing it. We've heard about the cost of doing it. It means we lose some revenue, but what is the implications if we don't do it? Does it make it worse if we don't do this now and we leave it for an additional 3, 4, 5 months until the weather's more suitable? Have we looked at the cost of not doing it?
From a practical point of view, it would deteriorate more. I don't know what percentage more. I don't know what the weather's going to be like, and so it would be a greater area that we would have to maintain. So, I suppose in terms of value, the original quote from the original bid from the company that's doing it now, or potentially doing it, they looked at 200 square meters to be repaired, and that was at 350. Now they're looking at 600 square meters to be repaired, for a price of near 500,000. So, it just depends how much deterioration there is, and that that's how it will grow.
Yes, one other issue, right, is that it's closed, people might realise, I don't need to drive into Horsham anymore. I can get park and ride, or I can do going walking, or I can cycle in, and it might actually have an adverse effect on the revenue generated. No matter when we do it, people might realise, I don't need to drive into the car park. I can go by another route. But I think it's important to realise going back to my original point, the cost of not doing. We heard earlier that it's likely to increase if we left it. So, and there will be no time, I don't think, when it's going to be perfect time unless we do it overnight. We could do it over one night. We can't do that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I think the point is, though, that if you don't do the work, all that you are presented with is a deteriorating situation where the bill just gets bigger and bigger. And the problem is, in the winter, you don't want water, possibly salt and other things like that, getting into the concrete, into the interstices and the joints of the concrete, because that road, from the little I know about concrete structures, leads to concrete cancer and all the rest that comes with it. So it would be totally imprudent not to do it. As I said, we were going to do it in a time frame that was better from a climate point of view and a weather point of view, but unfortunately, because of the events, it's been delayed. To delay it even further, I would question, the sense of doing that. I think Councillor Bevis has got a question.
No, sir. It wasn't a question so much, Chairman. I think we've had an interesting debate tonight, but this is going to Cabinet later this week, and then it's going to full council and emergency meeting, where all these issues could be raised again and will be raised by other people. So it just seems to me that I think we've really thrashed this one to death tonight, and doesn't really seem a lot of point in taking much more time before we wrap this one up.
Thank you, Councillor Bevis. Councillor Walters.
Thank you, Chair. I just have one question, really. The anti-jump fencing, is there any guarantee that that will be retained while the work's going on? Because it's historically an area where people use to jump from. And obviously my concern is that you could barrier it up and whatever, but people still find their way up to the top. And I don't know whether that's been considered in any way.
Yeah, it definitely has, particularly coming up to Christmas when it's a difficult period for people, for some people. So that is the edge area would be the area that gets prepped first. That's in my discussion with the potential contractor, and the barrier fencing would go up within a week. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that, because I know it's an important, like you say, it's people are desperate this time of year.
Now, moving on from the Swan Walk car park to a more general issue of maintenance, there are a number of questions on maintenance and maintenance schedules, which basically we'll move on to now. And that basically Dom has got some answers for. I'll hand over to you, Dom.
Well, I wonder if Liz has already picked up on the schedules that we have, the 5-yearly cycles, etc., in answering Sam's question earlier. So I don't know whether there's anything else that you wanted to add, particularly on that sort of other side of things at all.
No, not really. I mean, it's more that we have overlapping. We have annual, and then we have a 5-year program. We only on certain properties do we have an extended program. Yeah.
Thank you. Is there any questions now on a general maintenance or points of that nature, or shall we? Councillor Ellis-Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Do you review? You say you do it annually. Do you review that at the end of that period to say, we don't need to do it annually, we should do it every 18 months, or we might need to do it every 6 months rather than just a static annual review?
Well, our program maintenance particularly gets reviewed. For example, at the moment we're having high weather rainwater fall, and so we've been doing our drainage and kind of let our gutters only once a year, but we're moving that. And also the leaf fall is later on in the year, so we're looking at doing that twice before the the big rains kind of thing. Yeah.
I think one of the issues that have been raised is about, considering having KPIs or something like that for this sort of thing, and the problem having kicked it around both mentally and in discussions, it's rather hard to come out with a KPI that would be meaningful or would bring us the sort of thing that we want. But if anybody's got any bright ideas, you know, send me an email. I'm quite open to it. But having kicked it around and considered it, I'm a bit at a loss to see how to do that. But I'm sure somebody far cleverer than me can come up with it. Thank you, Liz, for taking those questions and everything. I'll now move on to the update from Task and Finish Group. Sam?
Yeah, thanks very much. So the Fast Space Task and Finish Group has met a number of times. I've been asked to chair that, and we've now started work going through our terms of reference so that we're dealing with all the things that we've been asked to look at. We've started by identifying the policies and that we think are worthy of review and in need of review. And we think most of them are within the Horsham District Planning Framework. And we've identified policy number 32, 33 and 42 in the first instance, which look at partly that the needs of the community have to be met, measures to combat and reduce antisocial behaviour, and also at adaptable and inclusive principles. And we also intend to look at sort of equalities impact assessments, because it's as much how we implement those policies as anything else. And then we're coming on to then look through the green infrastructure strategies as well, and to decide and determine whether or not there are things there that might be worth improving so that we're acting more inclusively. So we're scheduled now to meet early January, having gone through those policies, and to try and decide what sort of improvements and adaptations might be required to those policies. So that's a little update from us about where we're up to.
Well, thank you. Well, early January is a long way away. But I guess by the end of this week, you'll have a whole slightly tweaked set of policies, unless you've already seen them, which is quite possible, to consider and look at. And then that may or may not have an impact on what you're doing. I don't know if you've seen the updated policies or not yet.
The rationale behind January is to do with the fact that there's so much else, so much other business at the moment that's happening, and we don't want to have difficulties with the local plan being due at the same time. So it was to make sure that we don't compromise that. So we wait till basically the first days of January before getting back together, as opposed to compromising local plan business.
Okay, thanks. Well, there's logic to that then. Okay. Any questions for Sam on her Task and Finish Group? No? I have in mind a Task and Finish Group, but at the moment, I can't come forward. But the issue is to do with our 106 system. Basically, there was a Task and Finish Group to do with the finances side of 106 that was done. It must have been about, let me think, something like about 5 or 6 years ago, 7 years ago, and that seemed to work quite well. But in the 106 agreements, there are other things that are agreed with developers, and I have concerns about those other things like the handing over of public open spaces, things like hard landscaping, soft landscaping, and other issues that are part of 106 conditions, which I am not sure are being monitored or being followed up. But at the moment, that's where I am on that. I found out that internal audit is actually looking at the 106 system. So I'm waiting for the Director of Resources for Dom to come back to me with their remit of what they're doing, because there's no point in duplicating. What I know about the council is I suspect they'll be looking at the financial side and the money side, not at the other side, is what I suspect. But I wait to see what happens, and I will come back to you with my views and my proposals on that. I'm also in discussions with the Chair of Governance, looking at other things that might come forward, which we might do as either part of overview scrutiny, work and finish, or it might be done in the remit of it's not audit, is it, Belinda? It's governance. That was it. So there are other things that we might be discussing coming forward, which I may bring to you at the next meeting, or certainly using the email group that we have to keep you appraised and to bring you up to speed. Have you got any questions for me or for Sam? No? Okay. If nothing else, the stuff on 106 will give new councillors the opportunity to look at that, which I personally believe is very important for ward members to look at and to be involved in when planning comes forward with a minor, well, not a minor, but a small or major development. In my opinion, and it's a personal one, is that ward members should be involved and get their teeth into that, because it has a major impact on your constituents and on your ward. And with those words, I will pack up, but I will hand, Mike Wood might have a question.
Thank you. On 106, I've recently discovered there was a path that was supposed to be delivered by West Sussex County Council when a new development went in, and that went in nearly a decade ago. The money is still, there, and the path hasn't been built yet, but apparently it's coming next year. So it's worth.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that. In what way do you mean?
I reached out to West Sussex County Council about this agreement for this pathway down to Hangman's Hill in Southwater, and they came back to me and said that it's planned, the monies are attributed, and it's planned for 2024 and 2025.
Okay, we're just, as they would say, quid demonstrandum est. It just proves the point I was making, that it's something that you got to keep an eye on and you got to be on top of, especially bearing in mind that some of these 106 funds have got time dates on them, and we don't want to give money back to developers, do we? Next item on the agenda is the work programme. I take it you've all had a look at your documentation. Are there any questions on the work programme that you wish to raise, or is it all fairly clear? Can I take it as read? Thank you. Cabinet forward plan, again, in the paperwork you would have received, you would have seen the current forward plan. What's coming to Cabinet on Thursday, plus other things. Councillor Bevis.
Yes, Chairman, just a couple of points really. There's a new item there for the creation of a head of service, which I believe is for Parks and Environment, which I welcome, and I hope that this committee will tell the Cabinet that they welcome. And similarly, the Shelley Memorial Partnership, I think that's a welcome item on this list, and pleased to see it there.
Thank you. I mean, the issue of creation when you had a service from memory is basically because with the efforts on wheel to waves or waves to wheel or whatever it is, plus the rewilding and plus the greening Horsham networks, it was felt that there was too much work there for one head of service to cope with all of that, plus the leisure centres, plus the capital, etc., etc. So it was decided to split that post and to create another head of service to give it better management or better supervision, I think is for want of that. Yeah, done. Yeah. Councillor Walters.
So, point of clarity, number 6, and the review of the polling districts and polling places, that's actually coming to governance next week prior to going to full council. So the contact officer presumably is Lauren.
What's listed there? It's because Jane is the returning officer.
Yeah, with Martin Buffy, leader of council.
Yeah, basically, it's my understanding is that because it's polling districts and polling places and where people go to vote, it comes under the returning officer's aegis. So that's why Jane Eaton has got it in inverted commas in her basket to deal with. And of course, then it also then falls to the leader for him to deal with. That's why it's that way.
You.
Any other questions on the on that topic? Councillor Circus.
the new appointment, I've been involved in discussion, as Mike will know, with Mike and with Paul. Local government seems to have a penchant for names that mean something to people on the local government inside track, but mean nothing whatsoever to people, ordinary people, the ordinary people who voted for us, ordinary members of the public. I gave the example, the existing example of director of place, which I think is a daft name. I think we need to avoid this local government jargon. You know, I pick up Local Government First magazine sometimes, and I sometimes feel I need training in understanding some of the jargon that's used, and then I might be able to get more value out of Local Government First. But I would hope that we will have a nice, straightforward, descriptive term, and not some term that means something to local government people but means nothing to the public. We must never forget they are our target audience, and we want titles that mean something to them. The only other thing I wanted to mention was something that obviously I'm concerned about, which is the proposed West Chiltington conservation area, and it's described throughout as the Wells Cottages conservation area. Well, it's somewhat misleading, that, because the title ought to reflect that it covers the whole of the lanes that are involved. And people could be misled into thinking that this conservation area only protects Wells Cottages. And it protects a great deal more than that, including the general ambience of the lanes where the Wells Cottages appear. So I don't know whether somebody could take that on board. I also think that when it last came to Cabinet, showing pictures of, for example, the road I live in the 1920s, I don't think was desperately helpful. Maybe of historical interest. It might be more logical to show some up-to-date photographs of the roads affected to convey a real contemporary impression of what these roads look like and why it's important that they should be subject to a conservation area. If I could leave that thought with whoever can pick it up or not.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll take it as an action to go back to both the head of strategic planning and to the deputy leader cabinet member on those points. Quite happy to do that. So I'll take that on board as an action. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chairman.
Any other points for me? No? Well, we've already done the urgent business. So at this point, I'll draw the meeting to a close and thank you for coming. Bit longer than my normal sort of meeting, but a lot of things needed to be said. So thank you for coming. Good night.